lovely people. Welcome to another book chat wrap-up, the roundup of stuff that I've read at some point in my past. I've got quite a few books I want to talk about this week. I'm trying to focus on more books in these videos, so I'm just going to crack on.
Sophie Vlogs.
I want to start with Build Your House Around My Body by Violet Kupersmith. This was such an interesting atmospheric read. This is set in Vietnam. We are kind of centred around the disappearance of this woman, Winnie. But really, we're unspooling not just her disappearance, but actually the disappearance of other women as well. As this text unfolds, it becomes apparent that she's not the only woman from which there is this disappearing aspect that we are exploring. I'm not sure I understood everything that happened in this book, but I really enjoyed the process of reading it. It's told in a non-linear manner, so each chapter tells us, is dated from the point of disappearance. It might be like 2 days before the disappearance, or it might be like 3 years before the disappearance, or even further back. And so because we jump around, we're piecing together not just what's happened to Winnie, but all of these threads that are sort of what has culminated in what has happened to Winnie. It's really, like, it's mysterious, it's dark, it's kind of haunting. It is exploring a lot of different topics, like vengeance, like folklore has a real aspect in this, and I'm sure if I was more familiar with Vietnamese folklore, there were details that I was like, I'm sure if I knew more about Vietnamese folklore, like, this would be a hint to me at what's going on. It's definitely, like, also to do with, like, identity. Winnie is Vietnamese American, and that definitely has, like, an aspect in her. She feels very, undisconnected, not just from where she is, but kind of also from who she is and when she is. Also exploring bodies, particularly women's bodies, but there's very much like a physicality aspect of this. Colonialism, exploitation, loads of these really interesting themes, and I think it explores them in a manner that I did find very interesting and compelling to sort of unspool. Winnie is an interesting character to have this text centered around because she is a person who feels very lost. But also doesn't just feel very lost, but is actually actively trying to lose herself. Like, she tries to make herself fade from situations. She deliberately, like, dresses in a way so that people will confuse her with, like, someone else who works at the same school that she works at. Stuff like this. She's not just lost and adrift, but she is kind of pushing herself further out to sea, deliberately so. Which means it's almost like a strange point to try to anchor yourself to, but I think if you just let yourself go with this, I found it extremely compelling. It's one of those narratives I can definitely see why people wouldn't get on with this. I think I read it at the perfect time. I think I was just absolutely, like, went with it. I would flag there's definitely some elements of horror and just, like, grossness, especially to do with bodies and that kind of thing, which I am not always great with, and I think that's kind of one of the reasons why I gave this a 4-star rather than a 5-star, because I can't truly love it because I'm not great with those aspects. But they didn't, sometimes I've talked about books where I'm like, these things, I can't do the whole book, whereas that didn't stop me from enjoying this book as a whole. It's just there were moments where I was like, there's some visuals that are in here now. So I did just want to flag that. But on the whole, I found this really interesting as a read. I would definitely be interested to read more that Violet Kupersmith writes in the future. It's a little bit outside of my comfort zone because of that, like, darkness and all that kind of thing, but actually found it really fantastic. A beautiful book that I actually DNF'd is Skin by Ilka Tampke, and I'm really sad that I didn't love this because I adore this physical entity. I think this is just a piece of beauty. I think this is ever so slightly just like a difference in marketing versus reality. So I was interested in this because this is a fantasy that is set in Celtic Britain in AD 43. It's set in Caircad, and these people, we have like a skin that is like your animal that you have an affinity with. But our main character, what is your name? I've already forgotten it. Alia. So Alia doesn't have a skin, and then that means that she is kind of an outcast from society. She can't get married, she can't she can't be taught all of the traditional teachings, stuff like this. What I wanted from this was just like a fab Celtic historical fantasy, yes, and then also, like, it says at the start about how like the aggressive expansion of the Roman Empire is on the horizon. She must embark on an unsanctioned journey to protect her people and their pagan way of life. all of this kind of thing. This is much more, or at least where I was at in it, much more of like a historical romance that I was interested in. So I kind of, well, I had two niggles. One is the historical romance aspect. I got about 100 pages in, and this is just over 300 pages, so I got about a third of the way in. And you know when they're setting up a love triangle, but you don't care? So there's definitely a guy who's like set up as like one side of the love triangle who I thought was a complete dickhead, and who quite a lot of people in the book think is a dickhead. And then there's another guy called Taliesin who is he made an appearance. He's a bit mysterious, but if you are like me, understand Taliesin as a figure in literature, you kind of already know some stuff. And so there's, like, I have a sense of what his role in the text may be. It's just really hard to root for, like, a love triangle when it's very clear which one she's supposed to be with and which one is supposed to be a dickhead. I wasn't invested in that at all. Also, I wasn't super invested in this portrayal of Britain. It's leaning a bit too hard on what I would describe as like New Age ideas of paganism rather than like historical and archaeologically understood ideas of paganism. And I don't know if that distinction makes sense, but to me it does. I think I wanted something that was more rooted in like accurate historical information about what this Celtic culture was like, rather than rooted in New Age ideas of what paganism was. That's a personal preference from my front. I think a lot of people will actually really like that aspect of this. This is such a beautiful addition that I just feel like if I'm not loving this text, I should give this on to someone who will love this and appreciate it, rather than me who's just like, it's pretty and I want to like it, but I don't. Next up, I want to talk about a book that I read on my Kindle. I don't know where my Kindle is right now, so you're just going to have to deal with my face. This was Dangerous Remedy by Kat Dunn. I actually really liked this. I initially rated it a 3 stars when I finished it, but I've bumped it up to a 4 because I've been mulling, and actually, I think it's fab. This is set in revolutionary France, so the revolution is in full swing. We are in the height of the terror. We follow Camille and essentially this regiment that she's built up, and the start of this is like it's a heist to get this prisoner out of the conciergerie, and if you like Six of Crows, I think you will like this book. Not to conflate the two, they are very different entities, absolutely. One is like historical fiction, one is like fantasy. It's just, if you like that element of having a team of people that all have their own like individual like character, personality, that have to like pull off these amazing heists, and it feels like all the odds are against them, but then like twists and turns, that kind of thing. I think that if you liked that, you potentially will like this. My favourite thing about this is I loved the revolutionary France setting. One detail that was just immediately from the start is that the chapters are all dated by the French Revolutionary calendar, which is fantastic. I loved that detail. I felt like the revolutionary setting was so strong. Obviously, I like history. When I went to Paris, we did a lot of things. Specifically, we were like, my partner read up on like the French Revolution, so did I, and we specifically went to see like the conciergerie and all this kind of thing. So I was already going to like that. Actually, like, the characters really grew on me as this goes on. The basic plot is that this regiment, they are neutral in the revolution. They rescue people while commissioned from each side. So sometimes they rescue people for the monarchists, sometimes they rescue people for the revolution. They are all, like, have their deep, deep wounds because, you know, like, as an example, Camille's parents were part of the revolution, but the revolution turned on them and they were executed. And I think this does a really great job of exploring the revolution and how complex it was and how it reached this point where, like, neither side was correct. There is corruption on all sides, there is damage on all sides, but you have to find a way to get through. But also it's doing all of this while also giving you like a really fun heist and a bit of like a whirlwind plot. Everything is like go, go, go. There's twists, there's turns. There's also like a whole thing at the centre of it. This is that they essentially rescue someone. They realise they were not given the full information about this person, and then they have to decide what to do. And so much of this is just about the power of choice, about being able to choose your own fate and destiny, and people who've had choices taken away from them their whole life suddenly being able to decide. And I just actually have come away from it, and I'm just like, I think it's actually a really interesting and exciting fantasy. So I had a really fun time with that one. After that is like a steampunk fantasy. This is Changeless by Gail Carriger. This is the second book in the Persaud Protectorate series. I read Soulless quite a few years ago now, but I also lent it to my mum, and she has really loved the series, so she has lent me a whole bunch of the books, so they will be popping up in future book chats. At this point, Alexia is married. She has a position in society and a position within this like supernatural setup. So Alexia is soulless, by which I mean there are vampires and there are werewolves in this world, and one becomes a vampire or werewolf. In order to successfully transition, you have to have excess soul. Alexia is the opposite. She has no soul, and if she touches either of these beings, she turns them back into humans for as long as they are touching her. That aspect of her identity is kind of kept secret because it's quite a controversial and powerful thing in this like Victorian society that has learnt to live with supernatural elements. In this second instalment, there is something happening. It means portions of Britain, suddenly all of the supernaturals in this place can't change. They're back to being human, and they're trying to figure out what is causing this, why it appears to be a mobile phenomena. And so essentially Alexia's husband goes off to Scotland to investigate this thing. She has to follow him. Shenanigans ensue. I found this really fun and enjoyable. It's like a steampunk romp. It has a lot of like humour to the telling and a lot of like fun steampunk ideas like dirigibles and stuff like this. There was a character in this that I really appreciated, essentially just like French lesbian inventor. Absolutely, where have you been all my life? The thing is there's something that happens literally right at the end of this book that really pissed me off. And I know it's been done deliberately. So my enjoyment of the series is going to hinge on how the ramifications of this thing are dealt with. But on the whole, if you like steampunk, if you like humorous fantasy, that kind of thing, definitely a fun read. Next up is Love After Love by Ingrid Persaud. Ingrid Persaud is a Trinidadian writer. This is set in Trinidad. We're essentially following these figures who kind of form a family. Betty and her son Solo. It's been just the two of them since Betty's husband died a number of years ago. You find out very early on in the text that Betty's husband was physically abusive towards her. The other character is Chatan, Mr. Chatan, who works at the same school as Betty. She takes him in as a lodger, and essentially this friendship grows between them, and they form this little family, but they have a lot of these things that cause disruptions. So for example, Mr. Chatan is gay, but he's very much not open about this because of the danger to his life by being open. There's a bit of tension between him and Betty, and people who look at them are why aren't you together? I loved the start of this. I loved the bond between Betty and Mr. Chatan. I felt like that was my absolute favourite aspect of it. They have ups and downs in their relationship 100%, but they get each other and they are always there for each other, and in the real time of need they come through, and I loved that. The book kind of lost me a bit as it went on, if I'm honest with you. First of all is there's not a huge arc to this. It's very much you are just existing with these people, which is fine. It's just that I think by the time we got about halfway through, I was okay, and then by the time we reached the end, I was just okay. You get three perspectives in this. That's Betty, Mr. Chatan, and then Betty's son Solo. I found Solo's narrative really hard to just connect with. There's conflict between him and Betty that I just felt I was could you not just actually listen to each other and have a conversation fully? I don't know. And there's I would give a major trigger warning for self-harm. Self-harm is really explored in that perspective a lot, and I found that very difficult to read myself, and also I just wasn't 100% sure about how I felt about how it was all handled. There's a lot of heavy stuff in this that is explored, and I think just sometimes I just wasn't sure about how I felt about the handling. I haven't really modelled that out enough to be able to talk on it in any great length. Essentially, I felt like it started off really beautifully, and I was really interested in this growing relationship, and how it the form it took and all of that kind of thing. And then it just kind of felt like the narrative for me just never really went anywhere. I'd really like to hear your thoughts if you read this, because I'm just conflicted, because I'm I liked it but then I didn't like it. The final book I want to talk about is just a tiny little poetry collection. These are 3 Tang Dynasty poets from the Penguin Classics series. This is translated by G.W. Robinson and Arthur Cooper. So the first poet, Wang Wei, I loved. I've actually bought a bigger collection of his poetry because I want to read more of it. It was just beautiful, so serene, but also like a lot of it was about nature, but then also like some of the capturing of emotions. I don't know, I felt like it was really beautiful, and I'm really excited to explore some of his work further, capturing peacefulness, but also like the act of travelling and then the act of returning home, like stuff like this. I don't know, I just really liked it. The other two poets are Li Po and Tu Fu, which I did actually also really enjoy their poems. Wang Wei was definitely my favourite, and it's the one I'll be exploring further. But I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5 stars because it's little poems, and it was really nice to dip in. I just found a lot of them really peaceful, but then other ones very, they built to an emotion that I didn't necessarily expect, or like in 2 to 3 lines they would turn what was reflecting on something that felt a bit abstract, then they would suddenly bring it back into being personal, by like including the poet, how the poet felt, or stuff like this. I don't know. It was really, I wasn't sure what to expect because I just picked this up on a whim because I was like, never read this before, let's give it a go. But actually, I really liked it. Bit of a beast of a wrap up, but I would love to hear your thoughts if you've read any of these. Please do leave a comment down below. Otherwise, I hope you're having a really lovely day. I will see you next time for something different.